8A, first quarter 2022 CFO report. Erick Rangel, our CFO, will give us a presentation.
In general public, the following CFO report will showcase our budget highlights for the Q1 of 2022, as well as projects list, as well as an economic update. So with that, let's just get started. All right, so we'll start with our revenue so far this quarter. On the top left, that table, for the people who are not familiar with this slide, we start with our type of revenue tax. We have our first penny, second penny, third penny, our bid tax, and then our property tax. The second column is our budget estimated for 2022. The third column is our prorated budget up to the first quarter, which is around 25% and some historical data. Our fourth column is the actuals as of Q1. The next column is the difference in dollars. Favorable is positive, unfavorable is negative, and then the last column is the percentage of that difference. And just as a summary, our total tax collected all the way to the bottom, it's about 13.9% higher than budgeted, or $545,000. If we exclude property taxes, our sales-driven tax is about 13.7% higher than expected, or about $522,000 surplus. So the chart on your right compares how we're doing against budget, that 13.7% that you see on your right side. But year over year, we also see a growth of 14.2% versus the previous year. What it's important to highlight here is that we come out from a previous year of really slow growth of 2.2%. So we're sort of catching up to our previous levels before the COVID. And it's also important to highlight that these numbers do have some inflation built into it, which has been around 7%. And lastly, I'd like to mention that our hospitality industry has been performing quite well, with growth around for our third penny or tourism tax around 17.8% versus last year. And our bid tax has grown around 7% versus last year, but it's a little bit flat to budget. But just early April numbers, we've been doing great. So diving a little bit deeper into which industries are driving this sales tax growth, we see that the manufacturing, the transportation and communications, and the retail trade, for the most part, are increasing year over year and are offsetting our wholesale trade decline of 9.2%, or our finance and real estate services. These two that are declining right now had really high growth last year driven by COVID. So on and all, we're just seeing some of the industries that were declining in the previous year just kind of like recovering from that decline. Moving on to our expense side, this slide shows our departments on the table on the left, and then similar structure to our previous slide for revenue, our budget, our prorated budget, our actuals, our favorable or unfavorable expense, the percentage of the budget that's been used, and we added the seventh and eighth column. The seventh one is our revenue. How are we doing compared to our fee revenues or other revenues that are not tax-driven? And then an overall net surplus. So the story here is that right now we're at 24.6%. You see all the way to the bottom of our expense used. Gauging just as at the end of Q1, which should be around 25%. So we're sort of like there on the target spot. But if we exclude our reserves usage, which it's the last row that you see, that we pretty much allocate the reserves that all of the projects that have been approved, we're sitting at around 20.4% of budget. A big part of this surplus is just attributed to staff vacancies and some timing of expenses. We do have some departments showing deficit against historical or through our targets. Most of them are driven by early billings of insurance or early purchase of software services, or departments are also ordering their equipment sooner since we're experiencing very long lead times. So when we compare that to history, it's just up front. But on and all, the only thing that staff is looking at is our fuel expenses and our utility expenses, which increases at about 20% from the previous year. That some of that was not built into the budget, but we also increased the contingency out for these unforeseen expenses. So on and all, we don't see anything worrying at this point. When we factor in all the revenues, we're sitting at around $557,000 surplus, excluding the sales tax surplus. compared to budget. This is driven by additional fees, other tax fees, as well as we receive a higher $25,000 allotment of ARPA dollars from the other municipalities that did not want to take their share of the dollars. This slide shows our capital improvement plan activity, as well as all other funds grouped together, just to give you an overall picture of how we're doing. As it is tradition, the CIP has very low activity during the first quarter just because of the weather. And then it's even worse this year because of the lead times. Some of these expenses will actually have to be delivered next year. But if we exclude all of the non-capital related items, we're sitting at around 2.3% of usage for our CIP, which our main activity has been the library upgrades, which including the security equipment performed this quarter. And all the city is sitting at around 13.3% usage of their budget with a surplus of about $1.1 million. The next slide shows the summary of the City Council priority projects. And just as a reminder for everybody, these are the projects that are funded with unassigned reserves from the city. So starting at the top left, our current estimated reserve level is about $13.6 million. The table below contains the approved projects by City Council where we've formally adopted by an ordinance or a resolution. So the approved projects so far have been the facility improvements for 21 and 22 due to the McKean Street study. We have the Public Safety Center design and engineering that amounts to $522,000. We have the housing study for $35,000, the Brookings County food pantry, the city share for $300,000, additional mental health subsidy approved this year of $25,000, and the HVAC for the Swiftville Center approved recently for $1.5 million. All these priority projects add up to 4.8 of the approved projects. So if we subtract those from our available funds, we're at $8.7 million, almost 8.8 actually, to fund other items. With that, we've proposed, the staff has proposed primary projects, and these are in priority order for this fund usage. The first one's the training tower for the PD that's coming up in your budget amendment that I will be presenting later today for $590,000. Our public safety center, which is right now estimated for a total cost of $8.5 million, we still have $7.9 remaining for the funding of it. And the indoor rec facility at the holding barn for about $850,000. All these primary projects add up to $9.4 million. So if we do the math, top right, we would be sitting at a deficit of $634,000 if we were to fund all these projects. Now, this is where we introduce the first payment of ARPA dollars. As a reminder, ARPA dollars are going to be delivered in 2 years, in 2 schedules. We've received our first part last fall, around $2.2 million, of which $1.45 million are still available for use. This excludes the second tranche of dollars, which will be delivered later this fall, of about $2.2 million. So if we apply the available ARPA dollars currently received, we would be leaving $817,000 of unassigned reserves for the city council projects. And the staff also came out with a list of the secondary projects that are still priority but are not as critical as the first one or as a high priority, which includes the Gulf irrigation system. We estimate around $1.2 million. The library overall upgrade, which right now we cannot be funded. They'll just stay there just to provide visibility of what would be funded if we receive additional funding. Any questions on this one? All right, moving on to a just brief economic update. And even though our tax and our revenues, it's a good story so far for our region, I guess as a U.S. economy, it is important to highlight that the gross domestic product fell around 1.4% for the last quarter as a nation. This was mainly driven by the inventory buildup in companies. They slowed down the pace and just fading public stimulus from the government. What's good about this, I guess, it's that consumer spending increase, which is what drives usually the economy. And also the business are increasing the investment in research and development and equipment, which should increase productivity as well. So most economists are not concerned of this slowdown, given that there's still strength in consumer spending, but it's definitely a slowdown in the growth that we've been experiencing so far. With that, the annual growth for the remainder of 2022 is expected around 3%, and for 2023 is around 2.2%. For our region, it's outperforming our national average. Month to month, it increased in March about 1.3% from the previous month. And from the previous year, it's around 8.6% growth. Again, this is with inflation in it. So relatively, if you factor in the 7% inflation, it's a relatively small growth. Another item that I want to highlight is like the South Dakota unemployment is below our national average of 3.5. We're sitting around at 2.5%, which makes businesses very challenging in hiring and may also slow down our tax revenue, given that we would not be able to provide full services at capacity. And lastly, I would like to congratulate all the entire city staff for receiving the Distinguished Budget Presentation Award for the first time in the city's history. And this award is just a result of the excellent teamwork from the staff to produce a high-quality budget that is fiscally responsible and contains key information and transparency for our citizens. With that, I'll stand by for any questions.
Councilmember Wendell.
Thank you, Mayor. Looking at page 4 of the report, but I think it was like slide 31 on this presentation. You had referenced an additional $25,000 in ARPA dollars that came to Brookings because other municipalities did not claim the dollars or did not have it. They just didn't want. Why would another municipality not want those dollars, and how did they get directed to Brookings?
So they I don't know why they wouldn't do it, but they didn't go to the process of claiming them. You have to like write a letter and just do a lot of like paperwork to receive that award. So these cities did not submit it. I don't know if they are even aware that those dollars were available for them, but then they split them based on the original split methodology that we got our first allocation.
So they're unrestricted dollars other than the typical ARPA requirements, but they came to us uncommitted.
Yes,
right? Okay.
Correct.